Welcome to the Israel-Palestine Report. There has been so much going on in the Middle East over the last 24 to 48 hours. We have had the breakout of war between Israel, the United States, and Iran. We have had spirals where Iran has retaliated against Israel, has also attacked and reportedly killed several of the US service people in the Middle East. Iran has also retaliated against a series of countries within the Middle East, anyone from Qatar, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Oman, Saudi Arabia, reports also of Jordan, Syria, and obviously Israel. We have had escalations, and all of a sudden the United States and Israel are now talking about regime overthrow in Iran. At the beginning, the talk was only about bringing Iran back to the table. Then it was about protesters. Now it's about changing the regime. So much is happening over the last 24 to 48 hours. What we are going to do today is mostly I am here to address your questions, the questions of the people in the audience. It's lovely to see a lot of the familiar faces, not faces really, but names in the audience, and also to report on some of the most latest developments. If you follow my channel, the Israel-Palestine Report, I have uploaded at least 3 videos in the last 48 hours about how the escalation started, where we stand now, what has happened with the assassination of the Supreme Leader, what's going to happen from here. I'm going to address all of these things briefly, but mostly I want to hear from you, your questions, what is happening, and try to understand where people are confused and where we're going from there. With that introduction, I'm firstly going to put into the chat a link to join my mailing list, the mailing list of the Israel-Palestine Report, so you can be up to date on whenever I have these live events, courses that I run, etc. Also going to say that I have recently updated my website. Those of you who have been in my last course, you have met Jonathan Bellick. He updated my website. So I'm putting this into the chat right now. Let me know what you think about the website. Let me know what you think about anything else. If you have any suggestions. And of course, if you want to join that mailing list, please do get on it, because that is where I update when we have these live events and when we have anything else that pertains to our region. Hi to everyone who is joining. Lovely to see a lot of the familiar names. Lovely to see some new faces. If this is your first time seeing me, I'm Alon Burstein. I'm a professor of political science and Israel Institute fellow at Tufts University. I'm going to pause now, take a little deep breath, let a couple of people join in, and then I'm going to dive in. I have a list of things that I want to talk about. There's way too much to talk about over the coming hour. I'm going to address some of these things. Then I'm going to listen to your questions. If you have questions, feel free to put them into the chat. Please do write question as a preface to that, because there's a lot of people talking in the chat. I want to make sure I hit everything. And with that, we will soon dive in. I am going to take a little break. Again, if you're coming in right now, feel free to say hi. Feel free to say where you're coming from. If there's anything you want me to address specifically, and again, if you are interested in specific things that you want me to talk about, throw that out there. I will try to address as much as possible. I have a sneaking suspicion I'm going to be online a lot over the next coming days, so I'll try to address as much as possible. If not now, my next live session, either tomorrow or the next day. Already have a series of questions coming in. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to address them slowly. I am taking a pause for water. Those of you who watch me a lot know I tend to drink a lot of water as this goes on. Some of the initial questions. What's happening with the daily oil pumping and delivery? Craig asking, we will get to that. Craig, one day you're going to explain to me your handle. You have like 3 different handles: Crab Louis, Crab Lewis, Craig Lewis. One day we will sit down and you will hopefully explain that to me, because I'm dying to know. Barry asks, what actions are being performed by the Israelis and what actions are being performed by the United States? Also something that I will address, Barry, if I do not talk about that. Again, all these things, good questions. Ask me them as things go on. People joining from Australia. Tom, I think, joining from Australia. What time is it in Australia? Must be morning there already. We are here still on Sunday night. Rebecca asking, the transitional teams that have been set up in Iran, who is in it? That's excellent question, Rebecca. Who is currently running Iran? That is the second thing on my list that we are going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the assassination of Ali Khamenei, and then who in fact is running it. Tom says it's 1:05 p.m. It's already, what, Monday afternoon there? Wow, you can tell us what the future looks like. Okay, taking a moment, taking a little deep breath before diving in. I will say, so that people know what I intend to talk about, I'm going to talk about the assassination of Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran. What does it mean to be supreme leader? And then I'm going to talk about a little bit the succession mechanism, because unlike a lot of other dictatorial situations, here we actually have a pretty regular succession mechanism for a new supreme leader. We'll talk about that. Who is currently governing Iran? What's going on with the protests in Iran or lack thereof? And we'll talk about that. What are the goals that Israel and the United States have set and how they're constantly changing, as well as what is also going on with the regional implications, and that pertains to oil prices and etc. Also going to apologize in advance. Forgive me if I'm looking down here and there. Not only is there so much going on that I have notes taken, which usually I try not to, I just try to talk directly to the screen. But in addition to that, I have news flashes going off. I have like 3 different screens down here. News flashes going off from Palestinian sources, Israeli sources, Middle Eastern sources. So if occasionally I'm distracted, hopefully people will forgive me. And if not, feel free to write that in the chat that you do not forgive me. Other questions. Are there any armed groups in Iran, especially similar to Syria, that can realistically take control of the country if the regime is weakened enough? Great question. Questions with regards to how there could be protests. I will get to that. Thank you. Putting that in my mind. I'm actually going to write that down, armed groups. And if I do not address that, please bring that up again. Okay. Rebecca says, thank you for a good example of drinking water. Make me want to drink some too. My wife has called me a water dictator. I am constantly hounding my kids with, you need to drink more water. I think this comes from growing up in the Middle East, and we learn that you're always dehydrated no matter how you feel. Okay, so with that, taking a deep breath, going to start from, again, I'm not going to get into the entire escalation. I presume that people watching this are familiar with that. Very briefly, on Saturday, Israel and the United States launched an offensive against Iran. It started with an Israeli attack, but immediately was followed up with a United States attack. Iran launched retaliations against Israel and primarily against other targets in the Middle East, primarily attacking U.S. interests throughout the Middle East. The goals of that have changed over time. At the beginning, the initial attack targeted a lot of Iranian political officials, as well as Revolutionary Guards members, as well, and in addition to that, military figures. Then after that, the goals changed a little bit, and Israel and the United States started talking a different language about regime change, calling the Iranian people to get out and protest. We'll talk about that soon. All that happened on Saturday. Right now, I'm recording this on Sunday night, Eastern Time in the United States. And where do we stand right now? The biggest event that happened is that, as it turned out, the supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, was assassinated. He was assassinated in that opening strike that Israel carried out. This pertains to the question that I believe Barry asked. I'm not sure when it comes to who is carrying out what. All of the assassinations of the political figures and military figures, but essentially the political figures in Iran, have been carried out by Israel, whereas the United States has been focusing much more on attacking military installations, installations related to the nuclear program, and installations related to Iran's security apparatus, as well as the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. There is some legal reasons for this. Assassinations are in fact illegal by international law, specifically Protocol 1 of the Force Geneva Convention, and that is, among others, the reason why I would assume the United States has asked Israel to do this rather than the United States carrying it out itself. That's speculation on my part. The supreme leader being assassinated, lots and lots of people have suggested this is going to be the watershed moment. This is going to be the moment that the Iranian regime starts to crack. It may be. I'll talk about that a little bit later when I talk about protests in Iran and how this might actually end up influencing stability of the regime. But for now, I want to talk for just a couple of minutes about the role of the supreme leader, because I think there's a lot of confusion about that. A lot of people that are following the Middle East, what is happening, tend to think of the supreme leader as either just an all-encompassing dictator, a king, a president, whatever it is. The role is slightly different. So I want to talk about that. The supreme leader of Iran, this is a role that was established by actually the orchestrator of the revolution, Ruhollah Khomeini. This happened in 1979. The actual intricacies of what is the specific role of the supreme leader was actually put into place. It was written in the Iranian constitution by then a young hotshot scholar who was named Ali Khamenei, who then became the second supreme leader He was the one who actually devised how would the political roles be under the revolution that happened in 1979. The role of the supreme leader in Iran is all-encompassing. The supreme leader is the figurehead of the country. He is in charge of all matters that pertain to foreign policy and all matters that pertain to domestic policy. He is the person who, according to the Constitution, his role, and this derives from religious inspiration, according to the Constitution, he has to be someone of religious endowment. He's supposed to be someone who is very, very scholarly and learned, as well as someone who's politically informed. And his role is to guide the Iranian nation. Again, this is in the Iranian Constitution. His role is to guide the Iranian nation. He guides the Iranian nation by setting foreign policy and domestic policy, and in order to carry that out, the different security apparatuses that are in charge of ensuring the regime's survival, specifically the Revolutionary Guards and the Basij, all report to the Supreme Leader directly. That means the Supreme Leader is in charge of the security apparatuses. He's also in charge of the military, so basically of all security apparatuses except for the police. And therefore, this puts him as the most powerful figure in Iran. There is also an Iranian president. The Iranian president is in charge of essentially executing the tasks that the Supreme Leader then orchestrates. The Supreme Leader then devises the tasks, what is going to be the internal policy, the foreign policy, and then the president is supposed to carry them out. Now, unlike a lot of situations where you have an all-encompassing leader that holds all power, like we saw in Libya under Gaddafi, or like we saw in Syria under Assad, the supreme leader of Iran is not that type of dictator. In turn, he is actually elected into office. He is put into office by a council of guardians, a council of scholars, as can be translated in different ways. It's a council of mullahs that essentially are the religious scholars. They vote him into power. Technically, they can also remove him from power. He only serves at the pleasure of the religious clerics. This has never happened. The mullahs have never removed anyone from power, but technically, it is possible. That council, a council of between 85 and 88 people, are the ones that appoint a supreme leader. And then the supreme leader is the one that ensures that all the other mechanisms come into action. How did the government in Iran work? I know I'm talking a little bit theoretically and not exactly what has happened now, but I would argue this is important in order to understand how is the government functioning now and how is this going to actually project towards what might happen later. I am being told by Fredlund, I don't actually know what your name is, but your handle is Fredlund, the Assembly of Experts. That's probably a good translation. The Assembly of Experts, rather than Council of Advisors. Assembly of Experts is the ones that appoint the supreme leader, and then they oversee what he does. At that point, the supreme leader essentially assumes the most important role, not only because he is in charge of internal policy and external policy, but also because the way the Iranian institutions are designed, he then essentially has either direct control or indirect control over all of the other government institutions. For example, there are elections that happen in Iran. Those elections happen every 4 years. However, in order to run in the elections, you need to be approved by a different council, and the people on that council, half of them are the supreme leader, and the other half are appointed by the head of the who himself is appointed by the supreme leader. So thus the supreme leader ends up appointing half of the people that can say who can run in the elections, and also appointing the other person who can say who are the other half that can run in the elections. Therefore, the supreme leader ends up deciding who can actually run in the elections in Iran. He also is the one that appoints the Constitutional Council that then approves who can run for president. Similarly, in the same way, the supreme leader ends up being the one who determines how all different things happen within Iran. What is supposed to happen in the event that the supreme leader is no longer with us? The Constitution does not permit for a situation where the supreme leader is assassinated, but let's say that he dies, as happened to Ruhollah Khomeini in 1989. What happens? How can the next supreme leader be elected? The expert councils, or as was suggested, the assembly of experts, gets together, and they then appoint a new supreme leader, and technically at that point, he is considered the emissary of God. To some extent, this can be compared to the Pope. He is considered the emissary of God. The difference between the Pope and the supreme leader is he then has official political power in Iran to order what is going to happen. So, the question that then a lot of people have been asking, I've been getting a lot of emails, a lot of questions that people have been saying, so is there a new supreme leader? No. At this point, there is no supreme leader that has been elected yet. In Iran, they have said that they're going to appoint a new supreme leader in the next 2 or 3 days, but they have not done so yet. I suggested, when I was doing a live interview yesterday, I suggested that the reason that Iran might be taking its time, theoretically, there is a list of candidates. I'm going to say a couple of words. There's sort of 5 or 6 people that are probably going to be, one of them is going to be the next leader. I'm going to say a couple of things about them if I have time. But the reason why I would suggest they have not appointed a new supreme leader yet is because, wouldn't you know, Israel and the United States are continuing their bombings in Iran all the time. There are literally airstrikes happening in Tehran and the areas in Karaj and Isfahan. Like, if you see me looking down, I'm constantly seeing news flashes coming up, bombing here, bombing there, happening all the time. And so it is very likely that the council is saying we don't want to appoint someone yet until we're in a more stable position because, wouldn't you know, he might be assassinated in the next moment. Therefore, right now, who is running Iran? I'm just going to get through this. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Then I'm going to field, I see a lot of questions already coming into the chat. I'm going to try to address them. But I'm just going to get through this. Who is running Iran at the present moment? Present moment, Iran has appointed a leadership council that is made up of 3 different figures. One of them is the president of Iran. The president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian, I hope I said that correctly. If anyone here speaks Farsi, please correct me. Masoud Pezeshkian is the current president of Iran. Israel also tried to assassinate him in the opening attack. That assassination attempt failed, and he is on that leadership council. In addition to him, the head of the judiciary, Gholam Mohsani Azai, is also on the leadership council. So we have the president, the head of the judiciary, Gholam Mohsani Azai, as well as one of the figures from the Council of Experts, Ayatollah Ali Raza Arafai, who is also part of that leadership council. So right now there's a leadership council of 3 different figures that are in charge of all matters, all governing matters within Iran. This is very important because seemingly within the council we have a very delicate balance of power. The president, Pezeshkian, is in fact considered much more of a moderate. He is someone who, over the last couple of months, was literally begging the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, saying, please, let's abandon the nuclear program. Please, let's try to go towards a more moderate stance. We cannot possibly withstand what is about to come. So he's more moderate. In turn, the head of the judiciary, someone who was appointed directly by Khamenei, Gholam Azai, he's considered much more radical. He is someone who has Raza Arafai, wouldn't you know, he's somewhere in the middle. So it's probably not coincidence that they have appointed this council to lead Iran right now in the absence of a supreme leader. Why is this important? I was asked yesterday, live in an interview, what am I looking to with regards to what the trajectory of the war is going to be? And what I said is, we need to look at what this leadership is going to signal. Is the new leadership in Iran going to signal that they would like to turn towards negotiations? Right now, the United States needs a way to climb down from its ladder. Trump does not like wars. He does not want a long war. We already have 3 US service members killed. He does not want a death count rising coming into the midterm elections at the end of 2026. So if the leadership were to say we're willing to negotiate and to try to give Trump a way to say, see, we brought Iran to their knees and now they've given us the enriched uranium in their country and we can now end this, then we will see a de-escalation. In turn, if the new leadership in Iran tries to come up and say that we are going to turn towards more escalations and try to escalate the retaliations that we're having against Iran against the United States and Israel, something like that, then we're going to see things continuously spiral more and more out of control. Right now, we don't have a clear picture. On the one hand, the president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian, has openly said that Iran's going to land very, very detrimental hits on Israel and the United States. Throughout the day, we have seen several civilians in Israel killed and U.S. service members killed. On the other hand, there's also been reports that the Iranian leadership has appealed to the United States to ask for negotiations. U.S. President Trump openly said that the new leadership in Iran wants to negotiate, and therefore there might be negotiations. So we're having a dual game from within the leadership in Iran right now. We don't know exactly where that's going to go. Maybe they will appoint a new supreme leader, in which case we will see how that develops, and I'll address that a little bit later. But right now, that is the leadership in Iran, and that's the big question: what direction is going to go? Last thing I'm going to say about the leadership, then I'm going to feel there's a lot of questions coming in. Last thing I'm going to say with regards to the ongoing leadership and where it is, there is a big question of who is going to be appointed as the supreme leader. Because regardless of what happens, even if this council does govern Iran for the next day, week or two, it's not going to be long term. Within the Shiite religion, that is the way the theocracy of Iran works, and within the broader constitution of Iran, there has to be a supreme leader who is appointed. And that is going to be a question of how does that work and who do they appoint? And the Council of Experts is going to actually appoint a supreme leader. And depending on who they appoint, and again, there's a couple of different names. There's Hassan Khomeini, there's Mujtaba Khamenei, there's Ali Raza Arafat. There's a couple of different names that are like slated as they might be the next leader. Some of them are considered more moderate. Some of them are considered more extremist. And I'm going to say here, I'm not going to go through this whole list. I say I won't have time. But I will say that depending on who they appoint, that may well be an indication as to what the direction of Iran is. Are they appointing someone who is considered more moderate? Someone who's considered someone who is more accommodationist towards demands of the West? Or are they appointing someone more radical and extremist that is going to be trajectory towards the other side? I'm going to just say here that on my screen, I'm seeing some sort of error message. I presume people can still see me. I'm seeing messages coming in. Someone write in the chat, please. Can you still see me? Because I have an error message appearing on my screen. I'm perfectly fine with that, so long as people can still see. Okay, okay, thank you. Lots of people writing, we see you, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to try to ignore that message. If I appear weird at any point, it is because I have a big error message across my face where I'm seeing it. But meanwhile, I'm going to scroll back up. Thank you to people that say you look great. I see a big error across my face. I am going to scroll back up. Lots and lots of good questions. Forgive me if I do not address them all. I'm probably not going to be able to address them all. But I am going to try to scroll down some of them. Okay. Question. What's happening in the daily? Okay, these are the questions that I saw before. I looked at it a little bit before. I'm also going to, meanwhile, put into the chat, again, if you've just joined, a link to my website. I'd like you to check it out, as well as to join the mailing list here. Looking at some of the questions. The transitional team that has been set up, who is in it? Hopefully I answered that. Rebecca, if I did not, please feel free to ask follow-up questions on that. Jonathan says, are there any armed groups in Iran? I'm going to relate to that soon. Okay. Becca says, my first question, what is the ratio of supporters of the regime to freedom fighters against the regime? That is a good question. I'm going to talk a little bit about protesters soon. Becca, you know me well enough to know if I do not answer that, follow up, hit me again. Let's see some of the other questions. Will new Shiite cult leader make a deal with the USA or Israel, or will we be fighting to the fast end? It very much depends, like I said, on who is appointed. This council right now has a very delicate balance. This is a question from Craig. Has a very delicate balance between the radical on the one hand and the more moderate on the one hand, and someone in the middle who actually ends up being appointed as a supreme leader is going to be the one that tells us what the trajectory of the regime is going to be. Would you care to predict how long the military part of this lasts? I understand if no. So I don't know what your name is. The handler is 5W1FT Killa. Do I want to predict how long this will last? I do not. I do not wish to predict that. I have 4 degrees in political science. One of the things we learned very much is how not to make accurate predictions so that we're not ever proven wrong. Welcome to the world of political science. So I'm not going to give a prediction as to how long this is going to last. Other questions. Could you go more deeply into why assassinations are illegal under international law? Very briefly, because this actually does pertain to this question of what happened with the Supreme Leader. In general, international law prohibits carrying out any violent action against anyone in a neighboring country. That's a blanket statement. International law says you cannot carry out violent actions against someone else in a neighboring country. It also prohibits a lot of things doing in your own country, like ethnic cleansing, like mass arrests, and things like that. Then when it comes to the rules of war, because international law also says you cannot carry out acts of violence against a neighboring country. And then the next sentence in international law, and again, this goes to Protocol 1 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, says, and when you do carry out those violent acts, because it's very clear people are going to carry them out, here is what you need to do, or more accurately, here's what you're not allowed to do. And then there's a list of things like proportionality and combat, proportionality, offering humanitarian aid, not blocking, not using starvation as a method of war, obviously avoiding sexual violence, all kinds of things like that. One of the things that it says is that you're not allowed to attack anyone that does not pose an immediate violent threat to you. In other words, again, anyone who's joining right now, I'm addressing the question of why are assassinations illegal under international law? Because according to international law, what it says is you can carry out an act of violence in self-defense. Someone's holding a gun, pointing it at you, you're allowed to shoot at them. However, if that same person has dropped their gun, you're no longer allowed to shoot at them, even if you suspect they're about to pick it up again. You're not allowed to shoot at them because they're not posing an immediate threat right now. You have to try to arrest them. Similarly, if you carry out an attack, i.e. an assassination in this case, of someone who is a threat to you but is not an immediate violent threat, that is not permissible under international law. I'm not advocating if it's right or wrong. Many people say that international law is wrong, that it shouldn't be the case. That's absurd. Lots of people carry out assassinations. All well and good. I am saying that the reason, arguably, why both Israel and the United States have very, very publicly said that Israel has carried out all the assassinations and the United States is only attacking military targets is because under international law, assassinations are illegal. The United States has signed on many more treaties than Israel has signed on to. So it is very likely that the United States wants to avoid that, and that's the reason. Sorry if that was too fast. I will say, if you go to my website in about a week, I'm probably going to be offering a course in April on international law and how it pertains to conflicts in the Middle East, so we can talk much more about that. Other questions? If you could rewrite and put the question in front of your question, it makes, sorry, I'm a little bit confused. Oh, that's Becca correcting someone else. Thank you, Becca. Other questions? Let's see here. Sorry. Those of you who follow me know I'm technologically challenged. Would you care to predict? This is a question we care to predict. Let's see. Sorry, lots of comments. I'm sifting through to get to the questions. If Saudi Arabia joins the war, would they be cooperating with Israel as well? And how does that change the political dynamic? This is a question coming from Israel Cohen. I happen to know Israel. I think that you are up currently in the Middle East at about 4:30 a.m. So thank you for joining. If Saudi Arabia does join the war, Saudi Arabia has at this point said that they are willing to allow the United States to carry out attacks against Iran from their territory. I will say there's something weird happening in Saudi Arabia with regards to if Iran is attacking Saudi Arabia or not. From the moment that the war started on Saturday, there were reports, and again, those of you who follow me know I'm constantly getting these reports in the Middle East. There were constant reports of explosions that were happening in Riyadh, in the capital of Saudi Arabia. No one mentioned any of that for the first 24 hours. Civilians were reporting that the explosions were happening, not the government of Saudi Arabia, not Iran, not the United States. No one was talking about that. So I'm not sure if those explosions were Iranian attacks or maybe there were sleeper agents in Saudi Arabia. I don't know exactly what happened. Only in the last 10 hours or so did Iran officially carry out an attack against Saudi Arabia, and then Saudi Arabia said they are willing to allow the United States to carry out attacks against Iran. The question that Israel is asking is, would this be an open collaboration between Saudi Arabia and Israel? On the one hand, yes, it would. On the other hand, it's not the first time. Already, when we had the war in June, Saudi Arabia participated in intelligence and also arguably in intercepting Iranian missiles. So this would be maybe the first time there's blunt offensive military operations, but will far from be the first time that there's an open military cooperation between the countries. So, other questions. Again, thank you, Becca, for making sure people say the word question before they actually ask. Why assassinate the supreme leader if he is subject to assembly? Meaning the next supreme leader would have the same plans along the way. This is a question that comes from Zay. What would be the point of assassinating the supreme leader if the next one can just be appointed? Many people have made that argument. They have said, in fact, it doesn't matter if you assassinate the supreme leader, they can just elect the next one. I think that it is very, very likely that the United States and Israel are hoping that the next supreme leader who's elected will be scared of being assassinated, or that the council will deliberately appoint someone who is more moderate in order to stop these attacks, and that's the reason why they wanted to do that. All kinds of conspiracy theories also. Netanyahu, Trump, they would have loved to assassinate the supreme leader for their own reasons. Those are conspiracy theories I'm not getting into, but that's arguably one of the reasons why. What role can the Kurds play in the militias? I'm going to talk about that a little bit when I talk about protests. Okay, lots of people sending in hearts and broken hearts. I hope I haven't broken anyone's heart. And I am now going to go on. The last question I'm going to field. Will there be ground army in Iran, USA, Israel, or others? This is a question that is coming from Conrad. Will there be boots on the ground, so to speak, United States or Israeli troops in Iran? I highly doubt that at this point. Israel does not have the troops to commit to ground forces in Iran. They have lots of special ops in Iran. They have lots of Mossad agents, but probably not their ground military forces. And at the same time, the United States, Trump desperately wants to avoid engaging troops on the ground. He's practically openly said that. Remains to be seen. Taking a break here because there's still 4 more things I want to cover out of 5 things. I'm already past 32 minutes. Thank you, everyone, for lots of great questions, but this is a hot topic. Maybe I'll try to do a live also tomorrow or the next days to cover more. For now, taking a moment and going to carry on. As somebody was saying, Professor, go get some sleep. I will soon. Although, tell that to my kids. They're going to be up. I keep on telling them we need to get sleep. Okay. Moving on very, very briefly, I'm going to say, because a lot of people are asking me, because after this initial foray that happened, then this fell out of the news cycle a little bit. People asking me, wait a minute, are attacks still going on? Yes, there are constant attacks and backs and forth still happening between Iran, the United States, Israel, and lots of regional actors. The main players in this at this point are Israel and Iran. The United States is still carrying out actions. They're still carrying out a lot of bombing activities. They're still engaging the Iranian military. However, they are carrying out a lot less activity when it comes to initiated attacks in the heart of Iran. What is mostly happening is Israeli attacks that are happening in the heart of Iran, and the United States offering a lot of logistical support and also suppressing a lot of air support that is happening in, a lot of air defenses that Iran is using against Israel right now. So the majority of attacks right now are Israel targeting the different institutions within Iran. I want to talk about that a little bit soon. Targeting the state television in Iran, targeting the head of the Basij, the local police that's in charge of suppressing rebellions in Iran, targeting military installations in Iran, and alternatively, Iran firing ballistic missiles targeting main cities in Israel, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Beit Shemesh, Haifa, all those cities, Beersheba, all those cities have been targeted by Iranian missiles over the last several hours. There was one hit that happened in Beit Shemesh in Israel that killed 9 civilians. There were other hits that happened in Jerusalem, fragments, but most of the bombings right now in Tehran, in Isfahan, and areas in Karaj are happening from Israel. I will say that someone is saying screen freeze. Is that happening just for that person? Or because I still have this error message across my screen, so people still see me, I hope. Yes, no. You're fine. Great. Okay. So if your screen freezes, please don't type that in because, again, anyone who knows me knows I'm very technologically challenged. So while while I see this error message, I constantly think that I'm just talking to myself, which is something that I do more often than I should. However, if you have an issue, please resolve it yourself. Otherwise, I will be inclined to think that the problem is on my end. Ongoing fighting that is happening between Israel and Iran, something that is not making as much headlines and really is a major part of this war, and people should be considering, is the fact that Iran is carrying out mass amounts of actions against neighboring Arab and Gulf countries. We are having every several hours explosions that are being reported in Qatar, explosions in the United Arab Emirates, explosions, missiles, drones detonating in Bahrain, drones detonating in Saudi Arabia. We had an attack in Oman, other attacks that happened in Jordan, attacks in Saudi Arabia, the attacks in Syria. There was one report of actual explosions that happened in a port that belongs to the United Kingdom in Cyprus. I will say that hasn't been confirmed by anyone else, so at this point I'm taking that as rumor, but the other ones have been confirmed with a lot of footage. That is very important because that is going to be what ends up changing the regional balance of power if and when the regime in Iran does change as a result of this, or even if it does not. The United Arab Emirates have already pulled their embassies and all their diplomats out of Iran. The Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, someone just asked about that. He apparently, according to reports today in the Washington Post, was playing a double game. He said until now publicly that he was against the United States carrying out this action, but actually was pushing the United States to carry out this action. Saudi Arabia is a big rival of Iran. So while all of this is happening, while all of the attacks between Israel, Iran, and Iran, the United States is happening, meanwhile in the region, we are having a complete sort of fracturing of the different Middle East allies, and this is going to produce new alliances. A very, very interesting thing that happened, and this went, I would argue, under the radar throughout the day, was while Qatar, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Syria have all positioned themselves on the side of the United States against Iran, who did actually express a lot of condolences and a lot of sympathy towards the regime in Iran and expressed condolences and sadness over the death of the supreme leader, was President Erdogan of Turkey. Turkey issued a statement condemning the assassination of Ali Khamenei, saying that they expressed their condolences to the people of Iran and that they hope that the people of Iran stand firm towards a brighter future. That's a double talk. Saying if the people of Iran are going to stand towards a brighter future, is that overthrowing the regime towards democracy, or is that actually saying they will stand firm against the United States? That's literally double talk. But the only regional actor that had expressed condolences for the assassination of Ali Khamenei actually came from Turkey, a staunch ally of the United States, a member of NATO. So that unto itself is quite interesting when it comes to understanding, again, how this is going to play out in the region, because this war will end. There will be a die down, whether it happens in rebellion or revolution in Iran, whether it happens with agreement between a new Iranian leadership and the United States, the war will end. And then we're going to all sit back and say, what the hell happened? And where do we go from here? And then all of a sudden, the fact that Turkey bothered to side with Khamenei is going to be important at that moment. Remains to be seen. One more thing I'm going to say before I stop and look at, again, the monumental amount of questions coming in. I love all the questions and I love the participation. You could actually look at, I don't think any of my students necessarily are online. My students at Tufts, they know that all my courses are never me lecturing. They're just back and forth with questions. So I love questions. I shouldn't have planned this much to talk about, but since I did, I am going to still get to some of these things and just field some of those questions. So next thing I just want to talk about a lot of people are asking, what does this have to do, or how is this going to possibly precipitate protests in Iran? As a reminder, this whole thing started because there were protests that were happening in Iran, and then the regime suppressed them. Then Trump said that the regime has to stop executing people, and then said help is on the way, then built this massive armada that came in, and then all of a sudden it was about the nuclear deal, and it was about ballistic missiles, and then they started talking about regime change. So lots of people are asking, are there protests? Is this happening? Are the people actually rising up in rebellion? At this point, we are not seeing massive protests breaking out in Iran. Very, very little activity of protests that we're hearing about that's coming out from Iran, and there actually is internet connection in a lot of parts of Iran right now, so it's not just because of a media blackout like happened before. We're not seeing these protests coming out, lots of different reasons. Very possibly that the regime has managed to suppress a lot of these protests. Also very possibly that while a lot of people happen to be against the regime and in favor of overthrowing Khamenei, they also don't necessarily want to go out and be protesting in favor of the United States and Israel while the United States and Israel are bombing Iran. So it's a very complex situation to say, why aren't people going out to protest at this point? However, what I will say is that the United States and Israel have shifted their rhetoric over the last 24 hours. When this attack started, the United States said that they wanted to bring Iran to the table, that Iran should have come to the table sooner to come to a nuclear deal and a deal about the ballistic missile programs and funding proxies in the Middle East. Israel issued statements saying that their aim is to weaken the Iranian regime and to stop the nuclear program and the ballistic missile program. Seemingly, as a result of riding on the success of the opening Faris and the open 24 hours, the United States and Israel have started to change their rhetoric. All of a sudden, Trump is now talking about people coming out in Iran to go out in protest. People are coming, he is starting to say, people need to go out in Iran and take control of their destiny. Israel has also started to talk about protesters in Iran should go out and reclaim their destiny. We're coming for you. Israel went as far as when Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu gave a speech earlier tonight, there were translations, there were subtitles in Farsi underneath his speech, and Israel carried out a cyber attack. And during his speech, Israel broke into the Iranian state television, and his speech was forcibly broadcasted into the Iranian population when he was saying, we call upon you to go out and take control of your destiny. We're here standing behind you. So seemingly, we have seen a change with regards to the aims of the war. As far as Israel and the United States are concerned, I dare say that if the assassination attempt of Khamenei would have failed, then possibly Israel and the United States would not have been doing this. Following the fact that the assassination succeeded, Israel and the United States are feeling now's our chance. Now's a moment that possibly the protesters can come out and have an open rebellion, and we will help them. And then the question that a lot of people are asking is, what are the chances of success? Will a rebellion succeed? And in that, forgive me, I have to go to political science training and say, when do rebellions succeed and when do they fail? Rebellions tend to succeed when the security apparatuses turn against the regime. That is the moment, that's the tipping point. When security apparatuses say, I'm no longer willing to suppress the rebellion in order to preserve the regime. That can happen for two reasons. That can happen because of sheer fear for your life. You realize the rebellion's going to win, and you realize there's more people on the other side, they're better armed, and therefore I want to lay down my arms. This is largely what happened in Syria. In Syria, there was a security apparatus. Syrian military was in charge, and all of a sudden the rebels managed to secure a few victories and the Syrian military just dissipated. Or that can happen as a result of national sentiments. That can happen. This is what happened in Egypt in 2011 when the military council walks into the president and says, we are now done. We're not going to suppress the rebellion. Then it was 800 people have been killed, and we're not going to carry out mass slaughter in your name. It's time for you to step down. When the security apparatuses turn against the regime, that is the moment that regimes fail. At this point, there are 4 or 5 different security apparatuses in Iran that are in charge of regime survival, and none of them have turned against the regime. The classic ones are the Iranian military and the Iranian police. Standard, the same thing we know in quote-unquote Western countries. The military in charge of fighting the enemies of the state, the police in charge of ensuring security and enacting policy. They have not turned against the regime. In addition to that, the other 2 very important apparatuses within Iran are the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. This is the private military, essentially, of the supreme leader that is in charge of regime survival. They are the most hardcore ideologues. And the Basij. The Basij are essentially civilian volunteers, but it's not really a volunteer organization. They're well paid. Essentially, it's civilian volunteers that are in charge of local suppression. Every neighborhood has neighborhood watches. Every neighborhood has Basij. The Basij are people who are part of the neighborhood. They are armed. Their job is to suppress anyone who is talking about possibly rebelling. So they're much more in the local. We have not seen any defections of any of these. As long as we do not see those defections, I dare say it doesn't matter how many people go out to protest. Because one of the questions I was asked before, are the protesters armed or not? This is not an open civil war, it's a protest rebellion. Civil war is when you have an armed group that can challenge the security mechanisms and say, I'm armed too, you want to fight, let's fight. The protesters in Iran at this point are not armed. Someone asked me earlier about the Kurds. The Kurds are not armed in Iran. In Iraq, in Syria, they're not armed in Iran. As a result, we do not have the mechanisms to overthrow the regime by force. At this point, it is possible that Israel and the United States may be planning to arm the rebels. It's something that both countries have done, especially the United States, have done very, very heavily in the past. It does not tend to end well, but they have done very heavily in the past. However, at this point, with the lack of any of the security apparatuses turning against the regime, it is very unlikely that even if there's mass protest that breaks out, that is going to overthrow the regime because the regime will be able to suppress them. Now, if mass protests do break out, that will be the test as to if the security apparatuses turn against the regime. Mass protests break out, the Basij says, we are tired of beating up our fellow man, so to speak, and we'll turn against the regime. That will start a wave. That is one of the things that cascaded Syria into civil war in 2011, when the military said, we're tired of bombing our countrymen. So it is very possible that mass protests will be a catalyst. At this point, we're not seeing a lot of protests, but more importantly, we're not seeing any mass defections. People have often asked me, what will be the signs of regime fracture? It's not the assassination of the supreme leader. That's a major thing. It's a major thing that is going to change the balance of power in Iran. But what will be signs of regime fracture is the moment we start to see, when we hear little reports of police officers refusing to arrest protesters, the moment we start to hear of Basij, they're refusing to beat up people that are planning a protest, the moment with the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, we hear people that are laying down their guns and saying, we're tired of shooting at our people. That is going to be the moment that we start to see cracks in the foundation. Until then, we're not there yet. Lots and lots of comments. Most of these are people talking to each other, so I'm going to look back and see where people have listed questions. Questions about Hezbollah, I'm going to talk about that soon, I promise. Question, is this an extension of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, a resurgence of the Arab-Israeli conflict, or something else? This, at this point, is not necessarily directly related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This whole spiral did start with October 7th, that then produced Israel invading Gaza, that then produced involvement of Hezbollah, that then produced involvement of Iran, that then Israel attacked the Iranian consulate in Damascus, that produced Iran firing missiles, that produced this. So it's associated with that. But at this point, this is its own dynamic. This is between Israel, Iran, and the United States. So it's not directly related specifically to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I see someone else said this is just a bonus of that. Interesting way of looking at it. Not going to comment on that. Becca says, please comment on the most recent major development with Hezbollah. I promise I will. Other questions. We had a nuclear deal under Obama. We had a nuclear deal, yes, lots of nuclear deals. Lots of people talking to each other, which is absolutely awesome. But I'm just going to remind you, if you have a question, preface it with the word question, because I'm just skimming through these other comments. Okay. Most of these are comments to one another, which is awesome. Lots of people telling each other to look things up on Google. Google is amazing. So if people need to look things up, do please do that. Taking a moment to catch my breath, have a drink, and then I'm going to talk about the last things I want to talk about, which is how is this affecting the region more broadly. And that is going to be where I talk about Lebanon, Hezbollah, etc. If you have just joined now, or if you haven't seen this before, I'm again going to say I'm putting a link to my mailing list, the Israel-Palestine Report mailing list. Do please sign up if you want to know when these live streams come up or when there's all kinds of new reports coming up. Austin, the person who often interviews me on Live Now from Fox, is just asking a question. If you want to see our interviews, again, join that mailing list or check out my website right there. Austin asks, how would you have described Iran's relationship with Gulf states before the situation, and how is the situation changing that relationship? Austin, I know you want to ask me this when we're live on Live Now, but I'm going to address that briefly in a moment to talk about the region. We should save that question for tomorrow when chances are Austin and I are going to be talking live. Those of you who don't know, Austin Westfall, one of the most brilliant anchors, hosts one of the segments on Live Now from Fox, where I'm often interviewed. I will likely be on there tomorrow as well. Things of people bickering at each other. You should Google that. You should Google that. People, it's okay if we don't all know all the facts of the Middle East. It's a very, very, very complicated region. I have now been studying it. I started to say for well over 20 years. And I know I look, I have a lot more hair and I'm much older, but actually is for about 20 years. And I don't know everything about it yet. I love that people talking to each other, but don't be angry at each other if people know different facts. From this point to that point, it's okay. Okay. Last thing I'm going to talk about on my list, and then I'm going to stick around a little bit for questions, and we'll try to do this a little bit briefly, is how is this impacting the region and the world? Because this goes far beyond the situation in Iran itself. What we have is spirals of old rivalries that are all of a sudden being flared up in the region, as well as how this is affecting the world's economy. And I'm glad that some people are saying Austin is great. He really is great. I'll say also I met him personally, not only online, lovely guy. Within the region, Iran is a historic rival of several different Arab countries and Sunni countries. And there are two reasons for this. I mentioned this last night in my interview. There are two reasons for this. One of them is religious. Iran is a Shiite country, and there are really only two countries in the region that have a majority of Shiites. Those are Iran and Iraq. There's a large contingent of Shiites, some would say majority, but there isn't really a reliable census happening in Bahrain and other Gulf countries. So at this point, I'll say Iran and Iraq. The rest of the Arab Muslim world is Sunni. This unto itself puts the sides on a collision course. Now, there's also Catholics and Protestants. This doesn't mean that Catholics and Protestants are fighting each other now. True, but they did fight each other for several thousand years. So similarly to that, even though Sunnis and Shiites aren't in active religious war with each other, there is a built-in rivalry that has never really mended itself. That is the crux of a lot of the rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia, for example, Iran and some of the other neighboring Arab countries. Then there's also simply the geopolitical factor. Geopolitically, Iran, a big exporter of oil, wouldn't you know? Saudi Arabia, also a big exporter of oil. Kuwait, also an exporter of oil. Iran also has other natural resources, wouldn't you know? Qatar, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, big exporters of natural gas. As a result, there's, in addition to the rivalry that's based on religion, there's a rivalry that's based on geopolitical economic factors. Because of that, we also had political factors that came in. We also had, because Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries were more allied with the United States, Iran historically more allied with the Soviet Union than Russia and China. So by now, we have an Iran, staunch ally of Russia, China, and also supporter of Shiite militias in Yemen, Lebanon, and Syria and Iraq, as opposed to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, that are Sunni, relatively strong allies of the United States, and also support more Sunni activity in those different countries. So that is the crux of the rivalry between Iran and the Gulf countries. Add to that the fact that as part of their alliances, starting in the early 1990s, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, and later on the United Arab Emirates all host United States troops. Some of them to a larger extent. Qatar hosts the United States 6th Fleet. Bahrain hosts the 5th Fleet. Central Command has bases all across the areas of Saudi Arabia, Israel, some of them in Jordan, and a lot of them also in the areas in the United Arab Emirates. As a result, this war starts. Iran starts firing at those countries also. Ostensibly, it said it was going to fire specifically against the United States bases. In practice, it has also carried out drone attacks and missile attacks against other quote-unquote Western interests in those countries. This means it has also attacked the international airport in Kuwait. It also attacked the international airport in Dubai. It has also attacked institutions that it says housed Israeli diplomats, even though these were residential, in the areas of Bahrain and in the capital of the United Arab Emirates. So as a result, we are having the entire region being pulled into Iranian retaliations. And now, for the first time, we've seen Saudi Arabia saying they're going to allow the United States to carry out attacks from within its territory. Oman, which is a country that has been neutral in this conflict, also suffered an Iranian attack. So all of these things are leading to regional spirals as well. In addition to that, a factor that has to be considered is the economic factor. Iran controls the Straits of Hormuz. The Straits of Hormuz are a very, very thin strip of ocean that essentially connects the Gulf, the Persian Gulf or Arab Gulf, depends who you ask, to the sea that then allows the export of oil and gas to the rest of the world. Give or take 1/5 of the entire world's oil exports and natural gas exports go through the Straits of Hormuz each and every day. We're talking about well over 20 million barrels of oil that go through those straits each day. Iran has threatened in the past that if it feels it is under threat, it will close the Straits of Hormuz. And in fact, yesterday it did. It ordered the closure of the Straits of Hormuz. Today they carried out that order, and they fired on several different ships that were actually traveling on a massive oil tanker that was traveling through the Straits of Hormuz and forced it to retreat. As a result, we're not seeing this yet, but you can count on the fact that by tomorrow, we're going to see a massive shock to economic markets in the world. We already saw today the price of oil start to spike. If this continues within a week, every one of us will start to feel this when it comes to the price of putting gas in our car. But more than that, we're going to start to see how this affects companies worldwide. If you think about it, think about the ripple effects that happened when the war between Russia and Ukraine started, and this influenced the world's supply of grain. Because out of the areas in Russia and Ukraine of Donbass, about a third of the world's grain actually gets exported. Did we all go bankrupt immediately? No. Did the price of food rise? Yes. And this started to happen within about a week or two, because as supply chains start to dry out, again, think of COVID, as supply chains start to dry out, we feel that effect incrementally and slowly. Already today, Iran carried out that threat. Will they continue? Very, very likely. Will this have an effect on the United States? Maybe not in the immediate, but you can guarantee that Trump does not want to see rises in prices of oil and prices of gas, just as he's starting to think about the midterm elections in 2026 that will happen at the end of this year. In addition to that, remember Trump that is building on this America first, Venezuela, we're taking over the oil. How is this going to affect? It remains to be seen how much of an immediate impact this will have, but the markets in Europe, the markets in Africa, the markets in Asia are going to feel this pretty soon. Because even if the United States can maybe compensate from this with the oil from Venezuela, the markets in the United States and in Europe are inherently dependent on cheap manufacturing that happens in India and China. India and China receive their oil from the Straits of Hormuz coming from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and places like that. So we're going to start to feel this effect, and this is going to lead to a lot of pressure on the United States as well. How long this will take, don't know. I take you back to the initial thing that I said. There is a new council that's leading Iran. It has said, and the foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, did make a statement today that Iran's willing to negotiate. Trump said the Iranian regime wants to talk and I'm willing to talk. That could happen and it could take 2 days. That could happen and could take 2 weeks. What is for sure is all these pressures are going to start to mount unless we see a major change happening internally in Iran, unless we see mass protesters coming to the street and therefore security apparatuses turning against the regime. What we will probably see is within a week or two, these negotiations starting to take off and then the situation spiraling down. A lot of people have asked me, how's this going to end? I have said it will be the make or break is what happens internally in Iran. Israel and the United States, I hate to disappoint anyone who's thinking otherwise, Israel and the United States cannot force regime change from afar. They're not going to be able to actually succeed in forcing regime change from afar. The only examples in which the United States has managed to force regime change successfully have been Germany and Japan. That happened with several decades of occupation and billions of dollars spent. Every other place they've tried to have a hidden run of forcing regime change doesn't work. And certainly doesn't work without ground occupation. I'm not preaching that there should be ground occupation. I am saying that regime change in Iran will only happen internally. Otherwise, we are going to head to a situation where there will be a protracted negotiations that will produce some sort of deal as time goes on, because pressure is going to be mounted as a result of this economic pressure and the pressure of casualties. In Israel, we've had civilian casualties. The United States has already seen casualties of service people. We will see more of both in the coming days, and that's going to be the trajectory that we're looking at in the next several days. I'm going to again put into the chat, if you have joined in the last several minutes, a link to my mailing list. Do sign up if you want to know when these live streams are going to be coming up. I see that I'm going to probably do these every couple of days because there's so many questions that people are firing in here. There's also a link to my website. I've just revamped my website. Those of you who have taken my courses recently, you know Yonatan Belik. He has recently redone my website. So please check it out and actually let me know what you think of it. I am now taking a breath and looking back a little bit at some of the questions that people have put into the chat. Where were the three servicemen killed, on a base or a ship? Claire asks. I don't know. I have to say, I do not know. I have looked this up as much as I can. Iran made a statement that they attacked the USS, I believe it was the USS Lincoln, or the USS Gerald Ford. I don't remember which one they said that they attacked. And it was about an hour later that it was reported that the three servicemen were killed. So there are a lot of rumors that that ship was hit by missiles. The United States then put out statements that the ship was not hit by missiles. They were killed elsewhere. We do not know. Chances are it was either one of those ships or in one of the bases that Iran has been attacking. Iran attacked the base in northern Iraq, the areas of Erbil. There's a lot of U.S. bases there. They were attacked yesterday, possibly there. I have to admit, I do not know. Other questions that people have sent in. People are talking back and forth. People are saying Austin is great. In fact, he is. That is a true fact. Scholar and a gentleman is Austin Westfall. Becca asked, will I have time to go top off my gas tank tonight? Like I said, this is going to take time. Craig said, just get a horse. Okay. I'm glad we've formed We formed a lot of good relationships between everyone. Okay. So with that, I'm going to say again, the message to take away from all this, the last message I'm going to say, what has happened is monumental. It's going to have ripple effects for probably a generation in the Middle East. The United States coming in, again, Ali Khamenei has been the undisputed leader of Iran since 1989. The fact that he was assassinated now is monumental. This is going to have ripple effects on the trajectory of Iran when it comes to supporting militias in Iraq, when it comes to supporting militias in Syria and Lebanon, in Yemen. It's going to have ripple effects constantly. That said, this does not mean that Iran is now going to turn completely towards a new bright future of Western democracy. It's very important to remember that when it comes to the assassination of leadership, when Gaddafi was killed, Libya cascaded into monumental civil war that is largely still ongoing. When Saddam Hussein was killed, or was arrested then killed, Iraq cascaded into the civil war that produced ISIS. When the first leader of Hezbollah, Abbas Musavi, was killed, his successor was Hassan Nasrallah, someone who was much worse when it came to spreading terrorism in the Middle East. That doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to have a worse figure than Ali Khamenei. What that does mean is we don't know. We don't know where this is going. And at the same time, there is a well-oiled machine in Iran that is meant to ensure the succession mechanism of the supreme leader. The person who was in charge of that is a name I haven't mentioned yet, Ali Larijani, is the head of Iran's National Security Council. And he's actually arguably the strongest man in Iran right now. And he's the one who was tasked by Khamenei to ensure that if Khamenei is assassinated, that the regime lives on. So he's the one who right now is in charge of making sure that council works, making sure that the council of experts does meet, making sure that a new supreme leader is elected. This mechanism is still ongoing. If he's assassinated, the next person comes up. And if the next person is assassinated, the next person comes up. Unless we have an internal turmoil in Iran, unless we have protesters taking to the streets and the security apparatus is refusing to suppress them, we're not going to see a monumental regime change in Iran. We're probably going to see a new leader come up that may be a more moderate leader. It may also be a more extreme leader. We don't know. But this will only be determined by the people of Iran. It'll be determined by what's happening within Iran itself. If the protesters take to the streets and the security apparatuses refuse to suppress them, we'll see a change. If not, we're going to see this war continue until there's some sort of deal, but it will be largely a semblance of the same regime, maybe more moderate, maybe more extreme. Becca is reminding me that I promised I would address what is happening in Israel and Lebanon. Absolutely right. I said I was going to address that when it comes to the regional dynamics. Hours ago, literally 2 hours ago, Hezbollah joined the fun. I'll say that. We all of a sudden had alarm bells going off in the northern parts of Israel over here in Haifa. And instead of having missiles land from Iran, these were rockets that were fired by Hezbollah. As a result, Israel has now started retaliations against Hezbollah in Lebanon, carrying out massive airstrikes in the areas of Beirut. What does this mean? At this point, Hezbollah is not the same beast that it was before. Hezbollah is much weaker than it was prior to 2023. This happened largely as a result of two things: massive Israeli invasion of Lebanon that happened in 2024, as well as massive suppression of the Lebanese military that happened since that ceasefire ended up taking place in September, October 2024, that now has led to the fact that Hezbollah has a lot less freedom of operation within Lebanon. That said, Hezbollah still has probably 10,000 rockets, and they still have the ability to inflict damage on Israel. It is not nearly the same damage that Hezbollah could have inflicted when the war began. If this would have happened prior to September of 2024, we would have had at this point probably 10,000 rockets fired by Hezbollah, pummeling northern Israel, and adding another front that Israel had to deal with. At this point, in the entire thing, Ali Khamenei has been assassinated. Israel has reportedly bombed over they didn't bomb over 1,200 targets. They launched over 1,200 missiles at Iran, bombing hundreds and hundreds of targets. Hezbollah has fired 7 rockets. That's monumental. It's important. Rockets kill. It's nothing like what Hezbollah would have carried out in the past. So at this point, it does not seem like Hezbollah is throwing its weight in. It seems like it's trying to do a tip of the cap and say, yes, we participated also. Israel's retaliation until now has been relatively reserved against Hezbollah. It's been relatively like, okay, you fired 7 rockets, we'll carry out a couple of bombings, maybe that'll be it. At this point, if Hezbollah quiets down again, I imagine that we'll see that front dying down. If Hezbollah again fires rockets, and if there are more rockets or missiles even, that will lead to further escalation. So that's what I'm going to say about Hezbollah and Lebanon. Looking at a couple more of the questions that have come in. Question: how serious is the situation in Iran today for water? Their supply was so strained, and the doubts and doubt any hydroelectric plant is operating. I honestly haven't seen any reports on this. You're absolutely right that Iran was facing a monumental drought prior to the war. I haven't seen any reports on this. The Iranian currency was in such a cascade prior to this as a result of the sanctions that I imagine things have continued. I honestly will have to look into that. It's a good question. I admit I haven't thought of that facet for the Iranian civilians. I will look into that, and Matthew, I'll try to get back to you in the next live stream. Hopefully you'll join. Other questions? Any nominal technocrats on deck, like Ahmadinejad was supposed to be? So Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, former president of Iran, is actually one of the most radical presidents that Iran had. Like I said, the supreme leader and a president. The president is supposed to be just someone who executes the orders of the supreme leader, but whether they're moderate or more extreme tends to be influential. Ahmadinejad was a little bit more extreme. So that's my first challenge, the fact that he was supposed to be a technocrat. Yes, they said he might be, but he wasn't. No one is coming up as a potential technocrat at this point. Again, the current president, Masoud Pezeshkian, theoretically would actually qualify as that. He's an ideologue in the sense that he believes in the Iranian regime. He's not a religious cleric. So he's not like Hassan Rouhani or people that grew up within the religious establishment. So he's a through and through politician. He might be considered that. Interesting thing about Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, there were reports in Iran today that he was actually also assassinated in Israel's initial attack, former president of Iran. Israel put out a statement saying, we know nothing about that. So possibly he was killed in the bombings, possibly not. Random anecdotes. Other questions I'm looking at. One of my questions was going to be the dire circumstances the Iranian citizens were, and the riots must surely be doubled by the war. Yes, but at the same time, like tends to happen, when there is external threat, people band together. And yes, when Khamenei was killed, there was a lot of celebrations that happened in the streets of Iran. At the same time, the fact that there's celebrations doesn't mean that people are willing to go out and say, those of you who are bombing us now, we're on your side. So yes, the protesters that were protesting before now are even in a worse position, and they are probably in favor of the regime being overthrown. But it's hard to see if they're going to go out and storm the Capitol, and if so, if the suppression mechanisms are going to succeed or not. That's a different question. So Denver asks, who are the possible 4 successors to Khamenei? Honestly, I'm going to be very honest. There are 6 of them. It's going to take me too long to get into that now. I will try to put out a video about that tomorrow or the next day. And if I fail, then I will talk about that in the next live stream. I am sorry about that. With that, it has been an hour and 15 minutes. I am going to start wrapping this up. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Again, I'm putting into the chat here a link to my mailing list. Please do join. If you have not subscribed to my channel, also make sure you subscribe, turn on notifications so that you can actually know when my summaries come out. I do reports every couple of days or at least once a week on what's happening in the Middle East and in the Israel-Palestine arena. If you're interested, again, in signing up to the mailing list, check out my website as well. We're trying to launch some online courses about the history of the conflict, international law, Hamas, what is happening. So again, feel free to check out those things, and do please subscribe. Anyone who's watching this on video, on recording, I will also put a link in the comments. You can see it in the first comment below. Thank you everyone for joining, and have a good night.